Three men walked into a mosque on an ordinary Friday afternoon. None of them walked out alive. But because of what they did in those final moments, dozens of families still have their loved ones today. This is the story of three ordinary men who made an extraordinary choice and paid for it with everything they had. In the spring of 2019, the city of Christchurch, New Zealand, was shattered by one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in the country's history. A gunman opened fire inside two mosques, Al Noor Mosque and Linwood Islamic Center, killing 51 people and wounding dozens more. The attack was live-streamed, premeditated, and designed to cause maximum casualties. It was a moment of pure, calculated evil. But inside that horror, something else emerged, something that no amount of darkness could extinguish. Three men in three separate acts of breathtaking courage stood between a killer and his victims. Their names were Naeem Rashid, Dawood Nabi, and Abdul Aziz Wahabzada. Remember those names. If this kind of story moves you, real people, real courage, real history that gets overlooked, hit that subscribe button right now. We cover the human stories behind the headlines that too many people never hear. Naeem Rashid was a 50-year-old man who had emigrated from Pakistan and built a life in New Zealand. He was a father, a husband, a man who believed in community. When the gunman entered Al Noor Mosque and opened fire on hundreds of worshippers gathered for Friday prayers, most people, understandably, ran, hid, or dropped to the floor. Naeem did something different. Witnesses say he charged directly at the shooter. He launched himself at the gunman, grabbing at him, trying to knock him down, trying to wrestle the weapon free. He didn't succeed in stopping him entirely, but he disrupted him, he slowed him down. He forced the shooter to redirect his attention. In those seconds of chaos and struggle, people escaped. People who would have been in the shooter's path got out. Naeem was shot and killed during the struggle. His son Talha was also killed in the attack that day. A father and son gone in the same hour. But Naeem's final act was one of pure selfless instinct, not calculation, not hesitation, just love translated into action. Dawood Nabi was 71 years old. 71. An Afghan-born man who had lived in New Zealand for decades, who was beloved in his community, who had survived hardship and displacement and built something beautiful on the other side of it. When the shooter entered the mosque, Dawood reportedly opened his arms and stepped forward. Some accounts suggest he placed himself directly in the gunman's path to shield others behind him. His last words, according to witnesses, were simply, "Come here," an invitation to take him instead. He was killed immediately. 71 years old, and in his final breath, he chose to be a shield. There is no military training that teaches that. There is no protocol for it. That is something that lives in a person's character, quiet and unannounced, until the moment it's needed most. Dawood Nabi had it, and he gave it without hesitation. Then there is Abdul Aziz Wahabzada, and his story is different because Abdul Aziz survived. He was outside the Linwood Islamic Center when the shooter arrived. Rather than flee, Abdul Aziz ran toward the gunman. He grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a credit card machine, some accounts say an FPOS device, and hurled it at the shooter to distract him. When the gunman dropped a rifle while returning to his vehicle, Abdul Aziz picked it up. He chased the shooter. He threw the rifle at the car when the gun turned out to be empty. He stood in the open, exposed, shouting, drawing the attacker's attention away from the mosque and the people still inside. The gunman got back in his car and fled. He never fired another shot at Linwood. Abdul Aziz did not have a weapon. He had no tactical advantage. He was a father of four acting on something primal and righteous, the refusal to let evil go unchallenged. Later, he said he didn't think about dying. He said he thought about the people inside. What do we do with stories like these? What do we do with the knowledge that in the worst moment imaginable, ordinary people, a Pakistani immigrant, an elderly Afghan man, a father outside a mosque, rose to a level of heroism that most of us will never be tested for? One thing we must not do is forget them, because these men did not come from military backgrounds. They were not trained for crisis response. They were worshippers. They were community members. They were people who had, in some cases, already lived through enormous hardship just to reach that day. And in their final or most desperate moments, they thought not of themselves, but of the people around them. There is something important in that, something worth sitting with. We live in a world that constantly tells us heroism is reserved for a certain kind of person, a certain build, a certain background, a certain uniform. Naeem Rashid, Dawood Nabi, and Abdul Aziz Wahabzada blow that myth apart completely. Heroism, it turns out, is not about preparation. It is about the contents of a person's heart when everything else falls away. New Zealand's response to the attack also became a defining moment. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern refused to speak the shooter's name publicly. Within weeks, the country passed sweeping gun reform. Thousands of New Zealanders lined the streets and gathered outside mosques to form human shields of solidarity during the following Friday prayers. A nation grieved and then, crucially, acted. The 51 people killed were mourned as New Zealanders, full stop. But none of that would be the same story with the men who fought back. Without Naeem buying seconds, without Dawood standing in the path of a bullet,
without Abdulaziz running toward gunfire with nothing but rage and love in his hands. The Christchurch attack targeted people at prayer. It targeted a community in its most peaceful, most open, most vulnerable moment. And in that moment, the people inside that community revealed something that the attacker clearly did not anticipate, that among those he saw as targets were men willing to die so others wouldn't have to. That is not a small thing. That is perhaps the most important thing. Naeem Rashid was posthumously awarded the Star of Courage by the New Zealand government. Dawood Nabi was mourned by an entire nation that had barely known his name a week before. Abdulaziz Wahabzada stood before cameras and reporters and told the world simply that he did what he had to do. He was matter-of-fact about it, almost modest, as if running at a gunman with an FPOS machine was simply the obvious choice. Maybe for a man like him, it was. We remember them not because remembering is enough, but because forgetting would be a second loss. Quieter, slower, but just as final. Naeem Rashid, Dawood Nabi, Abdulaziz Wahabzada, 3 men who decided in the worst second of their lives that someone else's life mattered more than their own safety. That is the definition of a hero. Not the movie's version, the real one. If their story deserves to be told, share this video. Someone in your life needs to hear it.